by simply saying I want to welcome all of you who've signed in to this particular celebration of our Framing the Future series. This is the anniversary of our 4 years online. And in order to celebrate that occasion, we've invited an outstanding presenter, well known to many of you, one who can put into perspective many of the issues that this seminar series is organized around, and that is Dr. Doug Tallamy. My name is Gary Allen. I'm the president of the Maryland Forestry Foundation. I want to remind you that this series is being recorded and will be available on the Maryland Forestry Foundation.org website next week. I want to thank you very much for attending this session, and we'll speak just at the very end about what's ahead in our series for our 5th year. We've been delighted to have as our moderator for the entire series one of our foundation board members and one of our original Mel Fellows, and that is Megan Carr from the working with the City of Baltimore. Megan, you're our moderator. Take it over, please.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes for those of you in attendance. If you were forwarded an invitation to join this webinar and would like to get on our mailing list, you can do that over at the website as well. That's marylandforestryfoundation.org. And navigate over to webinars. There's a quick form there. All you have to do is enter your email address and you'll receive monthly notifications about other entries in the webinar series. And that is all you'll receive. So good news on that front. You can also review recordings of previous sessions on that same page. I also want to note we do have a large audience today, and I imagine many of you will have questions for Dr. Doug Tallamy. So if you would like to enter those questions, there's a Q&A function in your Zoom window. You should be able to find it at the bottom there. Please do feel welcome to enter those questions at any time. We have some time set aside at the end of today's session to go over those questions. If we don't get to your question, we'll apologize in advance, but the good news is that we're talking about a book that is essentially a large FAQ. So maybe your questions can be answered in the book itself. Without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Doug Tallamy. He's the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he has authored 115 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for 45 years. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the ways that insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His books include Bringing Nature Home, The Living Landscape, Nature's Best Hope, The Nature of Oaks, and his latest book, How Can I Help? In 2021, he co-founded the Homegrown National Park program with Michelle Alfandari, which you can learn more about at homegrownnationalpark.org. He's the recipient of many awards for his work, which he has asked us to skip over in lieu of just saying, here's Doug.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Okay, we are going to talk about building sustainable landscapes, why we need to, that's very important, how we do that. But one thing I want to emphasize is that sustainability works well at scale. So the more people that are doing it, the better it works on everybody's property. So we're going to focus on how you get other people to join in on this as well. Before we do that, though, let me ask you if you know what this is. To me, it looks like a fecal sac, a bird's fecal sac. You know, when birds are in a nest, the parents don't want them to poop in the nest. So they have evolved, the babies have evolved a little sack and they put the poops in the sack and the parents pick it up and fly out and drop it, lands on vegetation, and it looks like that. But that's not a fecal sac. It's actually a bolus spider. At night, it looks like a real spider, hangs from a leaf and drops a single strand of silk, puts one sticky glob of glue at the end there, and it goes hunting. And it catches moths. Moth flies in and it spins it around, wraps it up in silk very quickly, then has a good meal. Then it catches another moth, has a good meal. And after it's fed on these moths, it cuts them loose and they fall to the ground. And after it's fed on a number of moths, it has enough energy that it can create an egg mass. So the egg mass is made out of silk and all the eggs are in there. And that is how they spend the winter. They just hang from a thread all winter long. And if hunting's been really good, they hang 2 or 3 egg masses in a row. The real question is, why are moths flying into that single target? You would think a web would be a much better way to catch things, but turns out it's not an accident. This spider is releasing the sex pheromone of particular species of moths. So all the moths that fly in are males. They think she's a female. She is, but she's the wrong species. And I wanted to know what the species of moth that the bola spider in my yard was attracting. So I unwound the little bodies underneath her and found out it was the bronze cutworm. And I've got bronze cutworm males in my yard because I've got bronze cutworm caterpillars. And I've got bronze cutworm caterpillars because I've got goldenrod. That's their primary host plant. I also have this beautiful moth, the dot line white, because I've got oak trees, primarily white oaks, and because I don't rake the leaves away from underneath there. There is a dot line white cocoon in this leaf litter. And believe me, you would not see it when you're raking leaves. There it is right there, up close. They blend in really well. So it's one of the reasons we want to leave leaves on the ground. There's a lot of living things in there. I've got evening primrose moths on my property because I planted evening primrose. The moth did come. It spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded, but it works really well if you want evening primrose moths. I've got zebra swallowtails because I planted pawpaw specifically to attract them. And that worked as well. It would take me a long time to describe all the species that are now calling our property home, but it would not take me very long to describe what's happening in a typical residential landscape like this. There's no goldenrod, so there's no bronze cutworm, so there's no bola spiders. There's no oak trees, so there's no dot line whites. There's no evening primrose, so there's no evening primrose moth. There's no pawpaw, so there's no zebra swallowtails. There is very little that can live in a typical residential landscape, and we've got 135 million acres of typical residential landscapes in the US, and we're not through. By the way, that's 5 times larger than all the land managed by the National Park Service. And as I said, we're not through. We're still developing 800,000 new acres of natural areas every single year in the US. And you know, that is that we are seeing really scary headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years, a third of our North American bird population already gone. 22% decline in butterflies just since the year 2000. 2/3 of Earth's wildlife is gone. 40% of Earth's plants face extinction. UN's predicting we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction. The news is not good, folks, and that's why Elizabeth Kolbert gets to write The Sixth Extinction, talking about the 6th great extinction event that is happening on planet Earth right now. It's not predicted, it is already happening. And of course, this is the first extinction event to be caused by a living being, and you can guess who that is. So what's our reaction to biodiversity loss? I've actually been pleased with it. I didn't think people cared that much, but they do. And there are actually scientists studying what our reaction to biodiversity loss is. Richard Hobbs is one of those people. And he says we react in very much the same way we react when we discover we have a terminal disease, the 5 stages of grief. First, there's denial. We certainly have a lot of that around. Anger. I feel that sometimes. Bargaining, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe we can do this. Depression, I think we all feel that. And then stage 5 is finally acceptance. And that's where we have to push back, because acceptance is the same as giving up, and giving up is simply not an option. We cannot give on nature. That is what keeps us alive on this planet. So we're going to propose a different stage 5, and we'll just call it action. There are things we can do to make the Earth more sustainable. Now, we do have parks, we have preserves. They are beautiful places. As a matter of fact, that's why our national parks were established primarily, because they were exquisitely beautiful places. And Teddy Roosevelt had a lot to do with that. Of course, he expanded the national park system, and this is what he said: the establishment of the National Park Service is justified by considerations of good administration, of the value of natural beauty as a national asset, and of the effectiveness of outdoor life and recreation in the production of good citizenship. In other words, our parks were created because they were pretty places for us to play in. They were not created with conservation in mind. And that is one of the reasons we only have 3.6% of the US in the national park system, and only 12% is federally protected, which lags behind a number of other countries. Now, we do have parks, we have preserves, we've got land conservancies, and a lot of people wonder why these areas are not enough to sustain the biodiversity that we need. And it's a good question. There are actually several answers, but the big one is they're too small. When you take a large area and shrink it down to a small area. This is an exaggeration, but you're taking large populations and shrinking them down to small or tiny populations. And that's the problem. Tiny populations are highly vulnerable to local extinction. Why? Because all populations fluctuate. Good times they go up, bad times they go down. If you're a large population, even in the down cycle, there's enough individuals you can increase quickly when times get better. But if you're a tiny population, even in your down cycle, you often hit zero. You blink out of your little habitat fragment and then you're gone. And unless you recolonize, which is harder and harder every year, you're permanently gone. That's called local extinction. We're experiencing that all over the planet. As a matter of fact, there are a number of studies all over the planet, some of them quite long, 100 years in length, that are telling us the same thing. We have not preserved enough natural area on the planet to sustain the amount of nature that we need to sustain us. A very serious problem. Now, we tend to use extinction as a metric of trouble, but I don't like that because that's like going to the doctor when you're dead. It is too late. So defaunation, I think, is a more accurate phenomenon that we should think about. The loss in the abundance of what was once very common species, the species that actually ran our ecosystems, but now they're not common at all. They're not extinct, but they have lost their abundance. Good example would be the American chestnut. Used to be the dominant tree from Maine all the way down to Georgia along the Appalachian crest. And then, of course, we introduced the chestnut blight and it removed them. It functionally removed them. Now, they're not extinct. They come up from root sprouts, but they're functionally extinct. They are no longer running their ecosystems the way they used to. Same story with the rusty patch bumblebee. Not long ago, maybe 20 years ago, it was one of the most common bees in North America. Now, if you find one, it's a big deal. They're on the brink of extinction. So again, not extinct, but functionally extinct. They're no longer performing their roles in their environment. I can say the same thing for the American beaver. When Europeans came to this country, the beaver had established the hydrology of the entire country. And we essentially trapped them all out, changing the hydrology of the entire country. Now, they're not extinct, but every time a beaver acts like a beaver, we trap it and move it someplace else. So the hydrology is still changed, not for the better. This study just came out recently showing that the birds that are actually declining are the ones that have been most abundant in the past. So it just shows defaunation is the real problem here. The reduction in the abundance of the species that run our ecosystems, that's the real problem. It's local, it's everywhere. And believe it or not, we tend not to notice it. And we tend not to notice it because of something called shifting baseline. We tend to think that the way things were when we were kids is the way they've always been and the way they always should be. That's normal to us. So if we're born into a world that has been defaunated, that's normal. We don't see it as a problem. None of us missed the passenger pigeon because it was gone before any of us were born. It was the most numerous bird on the planet. So shifting baseline means that we're losing the biodiversity that sustains us and we're not even noticing it. Edwin Waiteel decades ago said we cannot make the world uninhabitable for other forms of life and have it habitable for ourselves. It's just common sense. So what are we going to do? Well, there is good news. And one of the bits of good news is that biodiversity crisis is part of the global discussion. Now, the UN has met 3 times now to talk about the biodiversity crisis. Last time, I think, was in May in Paris, was it? We were the only country not to attend those discussions. Well, the UN makes resolutions. Unfortunately, since 1990, not a single one of the UN's resolutions has been met. So it's good that we're talking about it, but that's not proving to be the solution. What about what E.O. Wilson says? He says that we need to preserve half of the Earth if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth. We're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the Earth, or it will disappear everywhere. And that includes humans. Very bold statement. And he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that very bold statement. And then he ended the book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we were going to save life on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, that's a great idea. We'll just put half the Earth aside, and all those things that are in trouble can be in that half. We can be in the other half, and it'll be great. Problem is, half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture, and I don't see that disappearing anytime soon. And we got 8.3 now, 8.3 billion people in the other half, along with all of our hardscape and roadways and airports and detritus. We don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? Well, I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation. We've got to give up the idea that humans and nature cannot coexist. We've had that idea for forever. But we now need to coexist in the same place at the same time. Not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. So we're not just going to save nature here. We need to save it over here. But look, there's nothing there. So we have to go beyond conservation into restoration. We have to rebuild nature in as many places as we possibly can. And that means we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, but thrive. So often fragmentation, habitat fragmentation is posed as the most serious problem that we have. And indeed, it's a serious problem. We've reduced viable habitats into little fragments of their former selves, and they are too small and too isolated from each other to sustain the amount of nature that we need. So what's been suggested is to create biological corridors connecting those isolated habitat fragments so that plants and animals can move back and forth between fragments. That should help with one of the problems of fragmentation, and that is inbreeding depression, where close relatives end up breeding with each other. The main problem, though, in my view, is it persists. The habitats themselves are tiny. And if they're tiny, when those populations fluctuate, they will still bleed out of these little habitat fragments over time. So I think we need to go beyond biological corridors and build viable habitats in between viable habitats. Something like this, put the plants back. That's even better. These lighter areas would be where our major cities or agriculture is, but this area is where we live, where we play, where we work. It's our private property. We need to put the plants back, folks. But to achieve that, we need a new attitude about property rights. We've got this idea that we each have the right to own a piece of the earth, and we can do whatever we want with it. But let me remind you, our yards are not like Las Vegas. You all know that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But what happens on our yards does not stay in our yards. Our yards are every single one of them is part of a local ecosystem, and whatever we do on our property is going to impact that entire ecosystem, either positively or negatively. Let's look at what happens when we decide we're going to have a big lawn. That's going to determine whether rain infiltrates when you have a storm, or whether it leaves a stormwater runoff. It's also going to determine how much you are polluting the local watershed, because with that stormwater runoff goes nitrogen and phosphorus and herbicides and insecticides, all the things that we have put on our lawns. The size of our lawn is also going to determine how much carbon we are adding to the atmosphere every time we mow. It's also going to determine how well we're supporting pollinators. If you have a lawn the way you're supposed to have a lawn, you won't support pollinators at all. You have removed the resources that they need. The plants we decide to put on our properties, to include in those lawns, are going to determine how much carbon we're actually sequestering. Remember, plants are built out of carbon. The carbon they remove from carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis, they're pulling that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, building their tissues out of it, and then the extra carbon they fix through photosynthesis, they pump into the ground with their root systems. And then finally, our plant choices are going to determine whether we're harboring ecological tumors like calorie pair that escape and biologically pollute, biologically castrate local ecosystems. And our plant choices are going to determine how well we're supporting the food web. Are we choosing the plants that share some of the energy they capture from the sun or not? So how we landscape, how much lawn we have, and our plant choices are going to help determine how much life our properties can sustain. And that is an awesome responsibility. And unfortunately, it's an awesome responsibility that most homeowners do not know they have. So that's what we need to do. We need to educate homeowners everywhere. It is a grassroots solution to the biodiversity crisis if we can get the message that everybody has the ability and actually the responsibility of taking care of the earth on the little piece of the earth that they, quote, own. So we're really talking about private property. How are we going to make private property sustainable? The reason we're talking about private property is because most of the country is privately owned. 78% of the lower 48 states is privately owned. 85.6% east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So if we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, and failure is not an option. But all that means is that collectively, property owners are now the hope and the future of conservation. Let's return to lawn for a minute because it is the low-hanging fruit. We all can do something to our lawn without getting permission from anybody. And we've got 44 million acres of lawn, which at this point is dedicated to an ecological deadscape. That's an area bigger than all of New England combined. And you might wonder why we do that. Well, lawn's a status symbol. We all know that. And status symbols are very important to humans. It's also easy to keep neat, and we all like neat, and we have to display our Halloween decorations. But what if we replanted half the area that's in lawn? Let's make it simple. Let's we say we got 40 million acres of lawn. We're going to cut that in half. That's 20 million acres that we can restore right at home. And that is what we're going to create Homegrown National Park out of. The key to sustainability. And that's a big space. It is going to be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country when we get everybody on board. You can join Homegrown National Park. We're a real nonprofit, and what you do is register your property, the location of your property, and the amount of area you're going to be a good steward of. Maybe you already are being a good steward of, but that goes into the database, and then your little piece of your county is going to light up with a firefly. That's our little mascot. And of course, the object is to get the entire country to light up with a firefly. Our mission is very simple. We want to motivate millions of people, not hundreds of thousands, but millions, to regenerate biodiversity in the way that you regenerate biodiversity, by planting the native plants that support it, by removing the non-natives that do not, and in so doing, building a culture that's sympathetic to the needs of conservation. So in short, this is where our existing national parks are. We want to turn that into that. Won't be that hard. There are real ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park, and one is a significant increase in biodiversity. And I'll give you some good examples in just a few minutes. It really works. It really works. A measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody removed the invasive plants just from their property, we'd be 78% done nationwide. We'd be 85% done in the East. Not completely done, but it'd be a very good first step. Significant drawdown of atmospheric CO2. Lawn is the worst choice for sequestering carbon. So the more lawn we replace with plantings like this, the more carbon we will sequester, pull out of the atmosphere and help climate change. And we're going to start to create viable habitat outside of viable habitats, outside of parks and preserves. Every bit of conservation we do outside of a park is going to help conservation inside of a park. I think there are equally important sociological products associated with Homegrown National Park. And one is national awareness, not just of what the problems are, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We want to change the culture. We want people to recognize that nature's not optional. It's not just there for our entertainment. It is essential. It's essential for everybody, and that means everybody owns responsibility to sustaining it. We want to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action's even better. And we want to merge all the existing conservation organizations like Audubon and National Wildlife Federation, Wild Ones, all the land conservancies onto one visual that we call the biodiversity map. That way we can measure how well we are doing, how much conservation is actually happening on private property. If we're going to take areas like this and turn it into that, we have to take this and turn it into that. Notice nobody's moving here. We're simply going to put the plants back. This is actually my mother-in-law's old house. It was built on farmland, and they put the trees back. It does work, and it doesn't take that long. Did I mention the Homegrown National Park is free? We're not charging because we're not trying to compete with other conservation organizations. We consider ourselves a movement, not an organization. We just want to unite all of us around the same page. We want everybody to record the good conservation that we're doing on the biodiversity map. But there is urgency in enacting the Homegrown National Park solution as a means of reaching sustainability. We got 135 million acres in residential landscapes out there. That's a big job. So we all need to get to work, and we need to understand what it is we're supposed to do. What do we have to do to succeed? Well, there's 4 things every landscape needs to accomplish if it's going to be what we consider sustainable. Every landscape has to support a viable food web. Every landscape has to sequester carbon. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies, and every landscape has to support pollinators. Lawn does none of those things, which is why I pick on it all the time. Plant choice becomes extremely important. We can't just decorate our landscapes with any old plant because not all plants are supporting biodiversity equally. There are 3 kinds of plants out there. There are plants that contribute energy to local food webs. There's plants that do not contribute energy to local food webs. And there's plants that remove energy from local food webs. The very best contributor around the country is one of our oaks. In 84% of the counties in which they occur, oaks are the #1 energy contributor to local food webs by far. Good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo biloba from Asia. It's a nice ornamental plant, has good fall color, but nothing eats a ginkgo. So it's not adding any energy to local food webs. A good example of a detractor would be any of our invasive ornamentals, so things like Callery pear and burning bush and bamboo and porcelain berry, those things that have escaped. Not only are they not contributing energy to local food webs, but they're replacing the native plants that do contribute, and therefore there's a net loss of energy from the local food web. We need to appreciate how important caterpillars are in terms of supporting our food webs. Dan Jansen has called them the meat and potatoes of terrestrial food webs. That's because they are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, we're going to have failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. And that's why I talk about keystone plants as being so important. Keystone plants are the plants that support the most caterpillars. Remember what a keystone is. It's a stone in the middle of the Roman arch, and if you take it out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they're making most of the food. Just 14% of our native plants, the keystone plants, are supporting 90% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. So I like to think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that we're building as the 2x4s that support that house. They're the support structure. You cannot build a house out of wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last century. If you want to know what the best plants are for your where you live, you go to Native Plant Finder on the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the ranked list of the most important woody and herbaceous plants in your county will pop up. So the old excuse of not knowing what to plant is just an excuse now. We do know what to plant. Just go to Native Plant Finder, and there's the answer. Now, people might wonder, I keep talking about native plants. Why do we need native plants? Why aren't the non-native plants supporting caterpillars as well as the natives? Well, that's because most insects are what we call host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. And those are the plants that it has a long evolutionary history with. And that's because 90% of the insects that eat plants have evolved very specialized adaptations that allow them to get around the defenses that plants have. Specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those chemical defenses, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those defensive compounds. But again, that takes a long period of exposure to those plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. And once they do, the insect is locked into eating that particular plant. And this is why plants from other continents do not support our native insects. They have not had the ability to adapt to those the defenses of those plants. Excuse me. Let's use the monarch butterfly as an example, because we all love the monarch. We all know a lot about the monarch. One of the things we know is that it is a host plant specialist on milkweeds. And we also know that milkweeds are toxic plants. They protect their tissues with cardiac glycosides. So if you go out and eat a bunch of milkweed, it's going to stop your heart. That's what cardiac glycosides do. Doesn't stop the monarch's heart because they've got the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify it. But milkweeds also have latex sap. That's what gives them their common name. When you break open the milkweed leaf, all this white goo comes out. And if you get it on your finger, usually wipe it off right away. But if you don't, let it sit there, and in a few minutes, it will gel. It turns into like chewing gum. And that's its defensive property. It will glue the mouth part shut of any caterpillar that gets it on its mouth. And then the caterpillar starves to death. So the real question is, how do monarchs eat milkweed without gluing their mouth part shut? And this is something you can watch or write at home. It particularly works really well on common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. The caterpillar will walk onto the milkweed leaf, and it usually goes to the end of the leaf and starts to eat. And if any latex sap starts to come out at all, it will stop eating, turn around, go back up the leaf about 2/3 of the way and start to chew through the midrib. And it chews until it has completely severed the midrib. And what it's done is sever the canals that shunt the latex sap from this part of the leaf to this part of the leaf, which means this part of the leaf now has no latex in it, and the caterpillar can turn around, go back down, and eat the leaf without any latex sap coming out at all. It's a very simple behavioral adaptation, but it's one that most other insects have not figured out how to do. By the way, that flags the leaf of the milkweed plant. So if you're looking for monarchs, you can drive down the patch of milkweed, and if you see that there are monarchs there. So that's the upside of specialization. The monarch is now able to eat a plant that most other insects are not able to eat. It's got the adaptations necessary to get around milkweed defenses. The downside of specialization is that now that's all monarchs can eat. We've got 2,137 native plant genera in North America, and monarchs can only eat one, Asclepias. That is host plant specialists. And the important point here is that monarchs are not special. They are specialists, but they're not unusual. 90% of our insect herbivores are our host plant specialists, just like the monarch. And we have measured what happens when we allow non-natives to take over our local ecosystems. What happens to all those caterpillars that are running our food web? This is one study I did with an undergraduate a few years ago. We went into hedgerows in Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania that were invaded with non-natives. So here we got a lot of autumn olive and multiflora rose and so on, and compared caterpillar populations that we measured in a standardized way to populations we measured in hedgerows that were not invaded. They were all native plants. And we found that when they are invaded, hedgerows supported 68% fewer caterpillar species. Caterpillar abundance was reduced 91%, and caterpillar biomass was reduced 96%. So this is the amount of energy that the caterpillars are bringing to the food web in those hedgerows. If you think of caterpillars as bird food, you've just reduced bird food by 96%. That's why we can't tolerate these invasions. We also have to reread all the things that E.O. Wilson told us. Take them to heart. Now, E.O.'s gone, but the things he wrote are not gone. And one of the things he wrote in 1987 is the paper called The Little Things That Run the World. And in that paper, he said that life as we know it depends on insects. They are the little things that run the world. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, it would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And humans, of course, wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. We have to appreciate how important pollinators are. Remember, if we lose our pollinators, we're going to lose 90% of our plants. Now, the country's pretty good at this. You know, there's a lot of talk about pollinators. We got pollinator pathways, but the reason people want to save our pollinators is a little bit off. All we hear about is how important they are in agriculture. A third of our agriculture depends on pollinators. That's actually not accurate. It's about a twelfth of our pollinators. But don't think about agriculture. Think about the entire ecosystem. 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants, including a few of our agriculture plants, depend on animal pollinators. So losing our pollinators is not an option unless you want to lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. We have to appreciate how important leaves are. Talk about leave the leaves. Yes, leaves protect the soil moisture. They prevent soil erosion. They return nutrients to the soil. Remember the nutrients your tree used this past year, locked up in those leaves. And if we don't return the nutrients to the soil, your tree can't use them again the following year. And if you do that year after year, you're starving your tree. And then finally, leaves are habitat for an awful lot of animals. People want to get rid of their leaves because they're worried that their landscape plants can't grow up through them. But think about that. Who was raking the leaves before we got here? And there were plants in North America. I read about it. So we don't need to get rid of all the leaves for the plants to come up. They're doing really well all by themselves. Here are violets at my house coming right up through shingle oak leaf litter that I did not rake away. There they are in the beginning. A little bit later, and in full bloom. Never raked any of the leaves. So even delicate plants are pretty good at getting through leaf litter. We need to recognize that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect decline, particularly in the temperate zone, both in the U.S. and in Europe. And these are all the ways that lights are killing our insects at night. It's a really, really serious environmental issue that has a really, really simple solution. First of all, and got a lot of lights out there, but we can turn a lot of them out. We put on lights at night out of habit. If you're worried about security, put a motion sensor on your light so it only turns on when the bad man comes, which isn't that often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of your light and put in a yellow bulb. Insects, nocturnal insects, are not attracted to yellow wavelengths. So if we were to switch out our white bulbs for yellow bulbs overnight, we would save millions of insects. And if you use yellow LEDs, that works even better. You'd save millions of dollars as well. Got to address this problem of mosquito fogging. It is a major industry around the country. And the mosquito foggers say, well, you know, it's okay because what we're fogging is a natural organic product and it only kills mosquitoes. And, you know, if that were true, I would hire them too. But natural and organic, well, maybe. But cyanide is natural and organic as well. So is ricin. So I don't know what that means. But only kills mosquitoes. That's not even close to true. Kills all the insects it comes in contact with, including our beloved monarch. This is the result of a mosquito fogging event on Kent Island a few years ago. My friend happened to be there, picked up a bunch of dead monarchs, but he said there were thousands on the ground. It was during a major migration event. It's killing our natural enemies. It's killing all our pollinators. I have an undergraduate right now who's looking at non-target effects of mosquito fogging, and she has looked at 6 different species of caterpillars, plus the adults. It kills them all within 24 hours. Without being fogged themselves, just if they land on vegetation that was fogged. So there are alternatives. You don't try to control mosquitoes in the adult stage. That only kills about 40% of them. You can use mosquito dunks. I'm not going to go into this in detail now, but it's very easy. You just fill a bucket and put a little handful of straw or hay in there and put it out in the sun, and it builds up populations of diatoms and algae, and that's what mosquito larvae eat. That becomes irresistible to any female mosquito in your yard. She'll lay her eggs in there. Then you buy a sheet of mosquito dunks, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic diptera, and the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is a mosquito larva. It's cheap, $12 for a season's worth of control. It's targeted. You're only killing what you want to kill. And if everybody did it, it would help a lot. We need to better appreciate how important small properties for conservation. 82% of us live in cities, and a lot of people feel like, well, you know, I don't need to do anything because there's nothing I can do in a city. Not so. This is Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. It's 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. All native plants except for a little bit of lawn here. And she's recorded 120 species, 127 species of birds that have used her property. So conservation can be effective on small properties if we use the right plants. This is just a foundation planting. A friend of ours, just wood poppies and violets. Very pretty and very functional. If you have no property at all, you can do container gardening of native plants, which will supply a lot of forage, particularly for migrating monarchs and bees in our urban areas. This is a pile of bricks right now, but what if everybody did container gardening on those balconies? It really would make a difference. And where was I? Washington State, and I saw this. It's all ornamental plantings, but it shows what you can do with balconies if you put your mind to it. And if you're wondering what the best plants are for containers, we now have that information on homegrownnationalpark.org. You get the native plants that do best on containers in your ecoregion. So you don't have to guess anymore. Makes this easy. Now, fortunately, we do have a silver bullet in our fight against climate change and biodiversity crisis, the two major crises we have on this planet. We can address them in the same way, and that is that conservation works. This is the Natusa grasslands, 3,800 acres in Illinois, more than 730 native plant species there. 180 species of birds have been recorded here. It used to be a cornfield. Nature is really resilient. This is Mentor Marsh in Ohio. It was the largest stand of Phragmites in the entire state of Ohio, 811 acres of Phragmites. They controlled it, and now it is a vibrant freshwater marsh. It's got wild rice, southern wild rice, and deer-tongued sagittaria. Both are listed species because they got rid of the Phragmites. This is Sibley Regional Park in California. There's a man named Glenn Schneider who every weekend takes a group of volunteers up onto this slope. They each have a spray bottle of vinegar and a little hand whacker. And the object is to get rid of this invasive grass. California is covered with invasive grasses they brought in for cattle. And when they do, they whack it out and they spray it. This is what comes back. They didn't seed any of this. This was in the seed bank. They've recreated vibrant, beautiful habitats simply by getting rid of these invasive grasses. And this is where Cindy and I live, 10 acres of what used to be a farm in Oxford, Pennsylvania. We moved in the year 2000, and it was a farm that, it has been farmed for 300 years, but the last thing I did was mow it for hay. When you mow for hay in southeastern Pennsylvania, you're mowing the rootstocks of all the invasive plants that are there. So when you stop mowing, and they did stop mowing 3 years before we moved in, that's what comes back. It's just a tangle of Asian plants. I had to cut trails just to be able to walk through it. So I don't want to minimize the amount of work it takes to get rid of that stuff, but it is much easier to do when you get your spouse to do it. And when she's finished, then you can see whether life has returned. So we put a lot of plants back, not all of them. And I'm measuring life on our property in two ways: the number of breeding birds and the number of moth species, because that's what those birds are eating, both the adults and the caterpillars. I am still measuring the moth species, but I'm up to 1,300. This goes up, 1,365 species of moths now. Got one the other night. That are now making a living on our property because we put the plants back. And many of them are really, really cool things, like the chinkapin leaf miner, the skullcap skeletonizer, the neighbor. They got great names. The little devil, the horrid zale, the forgotten frigid owlet, the obtuse yellow, explicit arches, and yes, there is an implicit arches as well. The snowy-shouldered aclaris, the grateful midget, the morbid owlet, the pink-shaded fern moth, the feeble grass moth, the scribbler, the lemon plagotis, the three-patched bigwing, the cynical quaker, the showy emerald, the green marvel, the Harris's three-spot, the confused woodgrain, the slowpoke, the tearful underwing, eyed pectes, the hog sphinx, the tufted bird-dropping moth. Who wouldn't want the tufted bird-dropping moth on their property, I ask you? Spun glass caterpillar, this is one of my favorites, and hundreds of other species have come to the plants on our property because we put those plants there. And people say, well, how come you have any plants at all? Why aren't they eating all the plants that you have? Well, remember, caterpillars are the bread and butter of terrestrial food webs, the meat and potatoes. Everything is eating them. like those birds. We have recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our property, and they're eating hundreds of caterpillars a day when they're breeding, each individual. I'm surprised I can find any caterpillars at all. We also have other insect predators that eat caterpillars, things like ambush bugs and assassin bugs, predatory stink bugs. This guy sat next to this aggregation of milkweed tussock moth and ate one a day, and there were fewer after that. A lot of parasitoids, Hymenopteran parasitoids, most of which are laying their eggs and killing caterpillars. We've got predatory wasps that sting the caterpillars, paralyze them, carry them off to their nest. They're paralyzed, so they're not dead, which means they're not rotting. If they killed the caterpillar and then laid an egg on it, it would rot before the egg even hatched. But this way, the caterpillar stays fresh, so when it hatches, the wasp larvae can eat it alive. Got vertebrates that are controlling our insects. We've got skunks, we've got possums, we've got raccoons, we've got foxes. 25% of a fox's diet is insects. We've got what is this? We got amphibians. We got spring peepers. We've got green frogs. We've got toads. We've got wood frogs. We've got salamanders. We've got ring-necked snakes. All of this has come back since they stopped mowing. We got the cutest little gray tree frogs, which are actually green when they're little. And what it is a balanced ecosystem that makes that landscape sustainable, makes that food web sustainable. Okay, there's something that's common to all of these conservation approaches, and that is whether or not they succeed depends on decisions that you and I make. Amanda Crandall was a student in one of my classes a few years ago, and this was part of a final exam answer that she wrote. She said, well, conservationists claim to be managing species and habitats. What we're actually managing is people, and that is so true. We need to change our adversarial relationship with nature, which we've had forever. We need to change it to a collaborative one. That is the only path forward. And the real question is, can we do this? Of course we can do this. You don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. You can make your property sustainable. And if you do, it empowers you. You know, more and more people are concerned that the earth is in trouble, and they're rightly concerned. But they feel, well, what can one person do? So they kind of give up. One person can do a lot. One person can shrink the lawn. One person can modify your lights. One person can put in a pollinator garden. We didn't even talk about that. One person can remove their invasive plants from their property. They can add keystone plants. They can fire Mosquito Joe. One person can entirely increase the ecological productivity of their yard, enhance their greater local ecosystem rather than degrading it. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can manage. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They are all underfunded. They're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. Robert Swan recently said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. It's not going to be someone else, folks. It's going to be you. You and me. I'll help. But it's going to be you. We all have a responsibility to do this. And this is why we created Homegrown National Park. It's a resource. It's something that we hope will provide the motivation, the guidance, the community for millions of people to tackle these conservation challenges. Because how we act today is going to determine nature's fate, and then ultimately our own. So thank you very much. Those are the websites that I mentioned, so you don't have to scramble to write them down. I'd be happy to take any questions now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I hope people had a chance to take a screenshot and get those websites down, but we will, of course, have this recording available so people can go back and revisit those. We do have a few questions in the queue, and I will invite folks to add their own as well. So again, that's the Q&A function, should be at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. Feel free to type those in, and we will get to the questions we have time for today. So we'll just start going through a few things. I think maybe you answered some questions as people were going along, so I might modify them slightly so that we can kind of build on some of these ideas. So we know we can go to the Homegrown National Park website to look for recommendations for plants for your particular ecoregion. Can you also recommend resources for figuring out, of those list of beneficial plants in your ecoregion, what's going to work well for your specific conditions, like light availability or amount of moisture and things like that?
Um, well, we don't have that on our website, but that is pretty easily available. This is where the web is just a wonderful resource now. So if you live, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania. If I lived there and I wanted to know what conditions white oak needs in Chester County, Pennsylvania, or you could just put in white oak. Where does it do best? That information is very easily obtained on the web. And it's important because, I do say oaks are the best, but we've got 91 species of oaks in this country, and they do lots of things. There are oaks that like their feet wet. There are oaks that like high, rocky, dry areas. There are oaks that like acid soil. There are oaks that like basic soil. So matching the conditions of your property is important. And that means you need to know the conditions of your property. But on the other hand, if you don't match them exactly and the plant you put in there doesn't do well, that's okay too. Just replace it with something, and you can do this by trial and error if you don't want to do a lot of research. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible. You don't have to be a PhD in horticulture in order to succeed. I will mention something else. Most people are not gardeners at all. They hire a lawn service, they hire an arborist. They don't have the time or don't want to deal with their responsibility, and that's okay too. But they do have the responsibility of managing that landscape, so you have to do it by hiring the right people. And there are more and more people that are being trained as ecological landscapers or ecological gardeners. Seek out one of those so that you don't have to worry about it. They're going to pick the right plants. They're going to maintain them. Native landscapes need to be maintained just like non-native landscapes. So,
Excellent. And that also feeds into a question that Catherine posed. So if she's looking to hire experts or consultants to go on site and offer suggestions, are there particular certifications that she should be looking for? And are there any red flags that she should be keeping an eye out for?
oh, that's a good question. I wish I had a better answer. Um, there are very few certification programs existing right now. They're popping up here and there, and I don't even know about most of them. But find out what the training has been, and again, look into it yourself. Google it, see if it's a legitimate program. On the other hand, there are small companies that have been doing this a long time, and they have gained the knowledge themselves. So if just because they don't have a high class certification, it doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing. So the typical mow, blow, and go guys, they need to be retrained. They don't have the knowledge at this point. But and ask around, ask for references. Who did they work for? What kind of a job did they do? That is the best way to get a recommendation. And the same thing you would do when you're hiring somebody for your company. Um, I don't know. Letters of recommendation actually don't work all that well, but if you ask a neighbor, oh, they worked for you, what did they think? Did they do a good job?
Great. Yeah, so the questions are flowing in. So a few things that are a couple themes that are emerging are mosquitoes. So we've talked about mosquito buckets today. That's a good strategy. Are there any timing constraints around that, or can those go out anytime mosquitoes are active?
Well, think about anytime mosquitoes are active, mosquitoes are most active at the end of the season, like right now. Um, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put them out in early spring when it's cool and mosquito populations are very low. The cost is so low that there's really no downside to it. But the time, what you want to do is anticipate when mosquito populations explode, which is usually in August. And it depends on where you live. Mosquito dunks don't work for everybody. If you live right next to a salt marsh, you have, acres and acres and acres of mosquito breeding habitat, and your little bucket's not going to overwhelm that. And all species of mosquitoes don't go to mosquito dunk buckets. So I don't want to offer it as the perfect solution. Um, but we have to get away from fogging because that's killing everything. I mean, it's way too, it's taking a hammer to a ant or whatever, I don't know, whatever that analogy is. So we have to find better ways to do it. The way to control mosquitoes is in the larval stage. It's not in the adult stage. And as a matter of fact, mosquito fogging was not an important industry in our country until there was the Zika virus scare. There is no Zika virus in this country. No matter what you read, there's no Zika virus in this country. It's in South America. Every once in a while, somebody who has Zika comes here, but it is not spreading. There's no way you're going to get Zika here. So I remember when Zika came to Florida and one woman, New York, started spraying, fogging everything to control Zika virus, and it wasn't there. Camden, New Jersey has obligatory mosquito fogging to control malaria, which hasn't been there since the 1700s. So, we've got politicians making these ecological decisions, and it's not cost-free. It kills everything. So let's be a little bit more mindful about how we control our mosquitoes. And keep in mind, most of the mosquitoes that are giving us trouble are non-native. They like Aedes aegypti, like the Asian tiger mosquito. So mosquitoes are critically important parts of aquatic ecosystems. We don't want to eliminate them, but we don't need those invasive species either. They're problematic. So.
And a question from someone who has neighbors who do still engage in mosquito fogging. And it sounds as though they have reached out and tried to, talk to them about stopping the practice, but they haven't been successful. Are there particular constraints in how close you should be? You should have like your pollinator-friendly plants and your plantings up to the property line when that kind of thing is happening.
Yeah, there's no doubt that drift happens. There's lots of cases where the neighbor sprays and it kills everything on your property. Do they have the right to do that? I'm surprised there's not more litigation in this regard, but there hasn't been. I'm not a litigious guy, but it really, I can see why people get upset for them suffering because of their neighbor's ignorance. I did have a woman approach me and say her neighbor was doing it, and what she did was ask her neighbor what they were afraid of. And it turned out they were afraid that their kids were going to get a mosquito-borne disease and die. I did some calculations without going all through them. But in a 10-year period, I think there were 3 kids that actually did die of mosquito-borne viruses in this country. And if you calculate the risk there, that's like 1 in 145 million chance that your kid will get a mosquito-borne virus. So you've got a much better chance of winning the lottery. There is a risk, but it's extremely, extremely low. And do the cost outweigh that? Does your neighbor know that he's killing the monarch, he's killing your pollinators, he's killing all the things that actually run our ecosystems? They might not care, but they might not know that either. There are signs you can put up. It says no mosquitoes means no fireflies, no this, no that, no that, no monarchs. It's right down. It's a very effective sign. You can put one of those in your yard. I don't know. Getting along with the neighbors, these are sociological problems, but this is one place I would love to see some top-down regulation. I would least like to see mosquito companies advertise accurately. When they say it only kills mosquitoes and it's a natural organic product, that's really misleading. As a matter of fact, only kills mosquitoes is blatantly false advertising, and I didn't think you were allowed to do that. You should say, it's going to kill everything on your property and you're going to live in an envelope of poison. And if you want to do that, hire us. We'll see how that goes.
All right. We also have some questions on policy. So, um, one is from a person who reports that a homeowner in their neighborhood tried to get a natural lawn going or convert it to wildflowers and native grasses, and they were cited by the city. What are some options for people to combat those kinds of policies? Um, yeah, any advice on that front?
Yeah, that's a very common story. That is changing. Um, First of all, there's a legal precedent now. I think it was 2 years ago, a Maryland couple sued their HOA for citing them, not allowing them to have native plants in their front yard. It was in the New York Times. It said, "I fought the lawn and the lawn lost." Now, they spent a lot of money doing it, but the HOA lost the suit, and so now there's a legal precedent, and they're less likely to challenge you. I think the state of Florida has told HOAs you're not allowed to do that anymore. So it's throughout the state they are no longer allowed to challenge you that way. I think the easiest way to deal with this is to avoid the conflict altogether by making an attractive landscape. Notice I say reduce the lawn. I don't say get rid of it. Lawn is a cue for care. It shows that we understand what the culture is, what the status symbol is. We're just going to have less of it. So use a strip of lawn along the sidewalk or the driveway or around the new beds you've created. Keep it mowed, keep it manicured. Perfect place to walk. It's a perfect plant to walk on. And it's attractive. And people don't get, you can do that. You can add a lot of plants to your property, but as long as you have that little strip of lawn, everybody's fine with it. Another thing that has been shown to work is use as a sign. We have homegrown national park signs. There's National Wildlife Federation signs. There's Audubon signs. Everybody's got a sign, but you put it out and say, this is a wildlife habitat. There are old regulations, particularly in some of our cities, that if you have tall vegetation, it's going to encourage rats. Of course, that's not true at all. Rats are in our sewers. They're eating our garbage. They have nothing to do with native plants. Or they say vermin. Nobody even knows what a vermin is. But these are old regulations that have been on the books forever, and we need to challenge them and get them removed. And more people are doing that successfully.
Great. I think so. Another emerging theme in the Q&A is really about communication. So one question that I kind of had for you, from my own perspective, doing some degree of outreach and education, is that ecologists are never happy with the amount of information that you can give someone. But I think that you tend to frame things really well. In your new book, I've been really enjoying those questions and how a complex question can be resolved, or you have good illustrations that are pretty succinct. What's your strategy for answering a question directly and with evidence without needing to include building the entire universe around it?
Well, that's a good question. I personally like to keep things simple, just for me. If I want to explain it in a way that I can understand, I love it when a tech person says, "Oh, this is easy," and then they go through 50 steps of doing something. It's not even close to easy. So I think simplicity, when it gets in our complicated lives, when it gets unsimple, when it becomes complicated, people just turn off. So that's important. Much of the added information that ecologists and scientists are adding they're talking about the exceptions. There's variation in just about every phenomenon that's out there. There's what most things are doing, but then there's some weirdos on either side of the distribution. And that's really interesting to scientists. And they want to explain, well, why this isn't fitting the pattern. And I get questions all the time. Well, what about how come the black swallowtail is eating a non-native plant? Okay, that's an exception, and it's a nuance, and you can explain that. But if you only do that, you've lost the generality of the statement. So I tend to ignore that unless it comes up, and then I'll talk about it. But yeah, keeping it simple, I think, is the key to getting people to listen and remember, because they turn off when it gets too complicated.
Right. See, I'm also seeing some recommendations for folks in terms of looking for the Chesapeake Bay landscape certifications for folks. We do have a couple of questions about deer, which we certainly get a lot of questions here in Baltimore Forestry on the topic. Do you have recommendations for folks who want to get native plants established and not immediately have them mown down by our little antlered friends?
Well, I have a very serious deer problem at my mom's property, and the only thing that works for me is cages. We got 10 acres, and then people say, "Why don't you fence it?" No, because I'm not a millionaire, and that's what it would take to fence it, and you have to maintain it. You'd have to have a gate that opens every time you go in and out of the driveway. So I have these, wire cages I built from wire mesh you can get at Home Depot or at Lowe's. It's about 5 feet tall. You get it in a roll. It's not expensive. And I cut healthy circles out of it, stake them with rebar. And if I have a young oak tree or anything now, I don't have no goldenrod left on my property because the deer have eaten it all. So if I want something as simple as goldenrod, I've got to have a cage around it. That's not sustainable, but at least I have the plants performing their roles. The real solution is controlling our deer. And again, that's a sociological issue. We know how to control deer, but the Bambi effect is very real, and people don't want to do it. It's curious to me um, how we allow people not trained in ecology to make ecological decisions. I always marvel, the Fed never asked me what I think the interest rate should be. And it's a good thing because I'm not an economist and I don't know anything about that. Well, why are we letting the public determine whether or not we control deer? They're not trained they don't know all the problems with the lack of control. We've got Lyme disease, we've got no regeneration in our forest. 200 people a year are killed by deer collisions with cars, which is much more than West Nile virus or poisonous snakes or any of the other things we worry about. There are good reasons to get the deer back under the carrying capacity of the environment, and society doesn't want to do it. How could we do it? Bern Blassie suggests we go back to market hunting. Remember how well it controlled those pesky bison? The passenger pigeon, not a problem anymore. So market hunting works, but we'd have to change a lot of rules to do that. And the people who are most against market hunting are hunters. They want more deer. They don't want fewer deer because they want to make getting that deer in the fall really easy. Of course, the deer in suburbia eating our native plants, and the hunters can't go there. So it is an issue we have to deal with soon, or we're going to have no forest left in the east because there's no regeneration. And also, I'll just add, the overabundance of deer is perfectly correlated with the terrible invasive plant problem we have. Why? Because the deer eat the native plants and not the invasives. So what's left? It's just invasives. The deer create disturbance by removing all the non-natives on the forest floor. And of course, the invasives move in. So the deer are directly are responsible for, I shouldn't say, partly responsible for the seriousness of our invasive plant problem. And it's another reason we have to control them.
Right. I see Gary's come back on camera. I'm going to squeeze in one more quick question because I'm curious your thoughts. A question from Elaine. Your thoughts or comments about using nativars, a named cultivated variety of native species. How do those play into uh, usability by insects and other wildlife?
It depends on what the cultivar trait is. So we did a study with 6 cultivars of woody plants. And it was 6 common traits: taking a tall plant, making it short, enhancing berry size, introducing disease resistance, leaf variegation, things like that. We did a common garden experiment for 3 years, comparing the straight species with the cultivar. And the only cultivar trait that consistently reduced insect use was taking a green leaf and making it red or purple, because that's loading the leaf with anthocyanins that are feeding deterrents. So that's a statement I can make. Avoid red leaf cultivars if you really want to help the food web. That was woody plants. It wasn't with flowering plants. So the news isn't quite as good with flowering plants, because if you fool with the flower, you're almost certainly messing up the relationship between specialist bees and that flower. The specialist bees and the flower have co-evolved together, very tight relationship. And when we change the flower shape or the flower size or make it a double flower, you've changed the reproductive parts of the flower into petals. Then you certainly have messed up pollinators. You can go to the Mount Cuba Center website in Hockessin, Delaware, and they have done a lot of trial gardening with flowering plants, comparing the cultivars to the straight species. So in terms of finding the very latest in those trial gardens, that's the source, Mount Cuba Center. But the end result is it depends. Not all of cultivars are bad, but some of them are.
Right. Gary, what you got?
Thank you very much, Megan, and thank you very much, Dr. Tallamy. Uh, I want to thank all of the participants in today's program and all those who've signed in to our webinar. This is a very special occasion for us, the anniversary of our 4 years of Framing the Future. I want to invite all of you to take a look at our website for if you want to go back and review today's program. We'll put it on the Maryland Forestry Foundation website, marylandforestry.org website in the coming week. I want to thank Dr. Tallamy again and invite all of you for the third Thursday in October to tune in to the next edition of and the fifth year of our webinar series. We're going to be talking about the impact of data centers on the landscape. There are more than 6,000 data centers either already built or under construction across the United States. In my own community right here in the Washington metropolitan area, there are nearly 350 of them. So join us next month when we begin to explore yet another issue that we believe will frame the future of forestry on the landscape of our country and our state. Thank you very much, Doug. Wonderful program. Really, I thought it was extremely valuable, as I think many others did. And for all those who joined in, see you again in October. Take care. Bye
Appreciate the
bye,
invitation.
friends.
Bye-bye.